Canzonetta by Jan Dussek. Part 1. The key turned in the latch. The door opened and a woman laden with shopping bags walked in. She was wearing a long dark coat and a scarf to protect her from the chilly wind coming in off the sea. The house was part of a typical Victorian terrace on the outskirts of the city. It was one of those red brick streets you see everywhere. At the front there was a garden gate off the pavement, leading to a small plot of grass and up to a dark red front door. It looked very neat and tidy. As she entered the house, she could hear the sound of piano emanating from the front room. "Is that you, Gwen?" said a man's crisp voice. "Yes, it's me," she replied. "What's that you're playing, Richard? It sounds lovely." "Oh, it's a new piece I'm learning for the kids to practice at school. It's called Canzonetta. I found it among some old sheet music in a music shop. I thought I'd try it out. It's rather good and easy enough for some of our better young pianists to learn." "How was shopping? Did you get everything?" "Yes, I did, thanks. But do keep on playing. It's such a lovely piece." "I love that flourish at the end where it changes melody. What's that called? Is it a cadenza?" "Not quite," said Richard, pausing for a moment to look up. "A cadenza is more of a virtuoso passage you find in a concerto. It's where the composer allows himself to, well, extemporize if you like, and show off his prowess, a bit like a jazz solo." "There's a beautiful cadenza in Beethoven's Emperor Concerto." Gwen wasn't a student of classical music, but she knew what she liked, and the Emperor was one of her favourites. She would always listen out for it on the third programme. "Why is it called Canzonetta?" she asked, putting down her shopping bags and moving closer to the piano. "I think it's something to do with being a little piece," Richard replied helpfully. "You're in a good mood," Gwen thought to herself. Canzons and canzonettas started out as songs, like in the French chanson for song, but then they also became instrumental pieces. "Well, it's very nice," said Gwen, warming to this friendly exchange. "I do love coming home and hearing you play. There's something about hearing piano music that's so restful." She turned around, picked up her shopping, and headed towards the kitchen, adding, "Don't forget, we're going to Sue's for dinner this weekend." "Oh," said Richard, "I'm really sorry. Didn't I tell you? I'm away. It's the school's music outing. We're going to a festival in the Midlands. I'll be leaving Saturday morning and back Sunday evening. Do you mind going on your own? I'm sure she'll understand." Sue was an old friend of Gwen's, on her own since her divorce, and the two were very supportive of each other. "Well, I suppose so," sighed Gwen, pausing to look back towards Richard, who continued to play. "You're away so much, I hardly think we're still a couple. At least that's what Sue is always telling me." "Well, she's a fine one to talk. In any case, I'm here now, aren't I?" said Richard in a jocular tone. "Oh, and by the way, how long do we have to keep that harp case in the hall?" asked Gwen. "It is rather large." Richard looked at the bulky black object propped up against the wall and said, "I'll try and find somewhere else for it. I told Jenny she could leave it here for now. Her place is rather cramped." Richard was head of music at a city secondary school. With his longish swept back hair curling up above his collar, he liked to cultivate an arty look. He was quite a dapper man, always smartly dressed. There were only two of them in the department, himself and Jenny, who worked part-time. Richard led the school orchestra, playing piano and violin. He enjoyed seeing his young protégés progress, and the concerts and festivals they participated in were always very rewarding. Richard was quite a purist in his musical tastes, very conservative, with clothes to match. There was nothing loud about the way he dressed. He always wore a plain dark suit and tie to school because he thought it earned him more respect among the pupils. He was also fastidious about preparing for the week ahead. On a Sunday night, he would lay out 5 pairs of identical black shoes and polish them, one for each day of the working week. The same applied to his shirts, socks, and underwear. He was also very particular about his musical instruments. His pride and joy was his Broadwood piano. He was a competent player, but liked to think that owning something as special as a Broadwood would inspire him. Gwen queried the expense. Broadwoods cost hundreds of pounds. But on reflection, she agreed that as they spent so little on anything else, they never went on holiday and didn't own so much as a suitcase, he should be allowed this one indulgence. Like Richard, Gwen was in her mid-60s, a small woman, rather nervous-looking, with greying hair she kept in a tight bun. She spent much of the day pottering about the house, content to cook, wash, sew, and attend her small vegetable plot at the back. She was also a keen jam maker, often to be seen with a large pan of raspberries or strawberries waiting to be boiled and bottled. These she would take to sell at the local WI market. Unlike Richard, who was highly strung and liable to snap if things weren't just so, Gwen kept her emotions under control. She found smoking helped, but as Richard refused to let her smoke in the house, she had to go into the garden or wait for one of her trips into town. Nothing, it seemed, would provoke her into matching one of Richard's little tantrums. They lived on the south coast. The mild climate, proximity of the seaside, and general well-to-doness of the area made for a gentle, relaxed way of life. Children had never come, and so they developed independent interests. He was always away at school concerts, and she devoted her life to charity work. Even in a prosperous city, there are always social issues like homelessness and people living rough on the streets. Gwen was a big supporter of the Salvation Army and spent at least one day a week out collecting. This involved knocking on doors and telling people about her work. She felt quite safe in such a genteel area, and people were always so friendly. They would invite her in, and before long she found she spent an hour listening to their life story. This wasn't conducive to collecting much money, but she concluded she was helping these people by being a good listener. Before her next collection, she had arranged to meet Sue for a coffee. She didn't frequent the city's coffee and tea shops, but Sue had suggested one on the edge of the city centre. They greeted each other and sat down. It was quite a big room with plumes of bluish-grey smoke rising from many of the tables. They both lit up and began to chat. "How has Richard been treating you?" asked Sue, tapping the ash off her cigarette onto a saucer. "Same as usual," said Gwen, picking the walnuts off her coffee cake and eating them one at a time. "He's going away again this weekend, so I'm afraid he won't be with us on Saturday. I'm sure he's got a fancy woman somewhere. I don't know how you put up with him," said Sue, blowing out a long plume of smoke across the room. "You should just leave. Go and find a place of your own. That would teach him a lesson. Or come and live with me." Gwen laughed the croaky laugh of a long-time smoker. "That's so lovely of you, but no, I don't think I could do that," said Gwen, in the resigned voice of someone who realized that making such a life-changing decision might make matters worse. Better the devil you know. As they were talking, Gwen looked over to the far side of the room and noticed a woman, her face slightly shielded by the head of a man who was in animated conversation with her. A small child was sitting next to them. Richard and Gwen always joked that you could always tell married couples in a restaurant because they would sit in silence. Couples who were not married would do the reverse. The back of the man's head looked just like Richard's, but it couldn't be him. Although it was an inset day and he wasn't required, he had gone in anyway. And besides, he was wearing a different coat to the one he'd left home with. "Who are you looking at?" asked Sue, taking another sip of her coffee. "Oh, no one," said Gwen, smiling. "I just saw someone who reminded me of Richard." Later in the afternoon, after spending several hours on the streets, she arrived home around 5 p.m. As she entered the house, she once again heard the familiar strains of Canzonetta. "Hello," said the voice from the piano room. "Have you had a good day?" "It's so nice to hear you play that lovely tune," said Gwen as she entered the room. "Who is it by?" "A Czech composer called Jan Ladislav Dussek. Quite an interesting man. He came to London in the 1790s and met John Broadwood." "That's the make of your piano, isn't it?" said Gwen, rearranging the cushions on their settee. "Yes, it is. In fact, it was Dussek who worked with Broadwood in extending the range of the piano from 5 octaves to 6. That's how he was able to create that flourish you like so much." "It's a shame you can never hear a lovely piece played like that on the 3rd program," Gwen replied. "You should send it to them." "I can't think of anything worse," replied Richard rather testily. "The last thing I want to do is popularize it. In any case, the 3rd program never plays anything by Dussek, so wouldn't get a look in. No, I think we'll just keep it between ourselves. Our secret, said Gwen. Our little secret, said Richard with a smile. The following day, Richard came home at his usual time of around 5 p.m. As he entered the house, he could hear the very clear and beautifully played notes of the Canzonetta. Guess what I found at the library, said Gwen with an air of excitement as she pointed to the record player. It's Canzonetta. I was amazed to find it on an LP of Czech composers, and it's got loads of notes about them. Have you been smoking again? Richard interrupted with a look of annoyance. It's such a dirty habit. Your clothes smell. I really won't put up with it. Before he could say any more, Gwen continued. Before he came to London, Dussek had left Prague for Paris, just before the revolution. It says here that he became a favourite of Marie Antoinette and taught her the piano. That didn't end too well, said Richard, who was now changing his tune. Gwen continued. And it says that while he was in Paris, he taught the violin to a young army officer by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. Go on, said Richard, warming to the subject. This is fascinating stuff. Well, said Gwen, scanning the page, Dussek married a Scottish harp player called Sophia, but he made her so unhappy with his many affairs that one day she went out on the pretext of having a lesson and never came back. Apparently she packed all her belongings in the harp case. Huh, said Richard. Well, I hope you don't go getting any ideas. They both laughed and Gwen left the room to prepare supper. Later that evening, they were sitting in their living room, Gwen reading while Richard was marking homework. Gwen looked up and said, I found out something else about Dussek. It says his work is marked by lyricism interrupted by sudden dynamic contrasts. That's just how Canzonetta sounds to me. Yes, said Richard, a canzonetta is an expression of... But just before he could finish, the doorbell sounded. Who could that be? Asked Gwen with a slight air of worry. It was 8:30 and they didn't usually have visitors at that time of the evening. Don't worry, said Richard, getting up. I'll get it. Gwen could hear voices at the door, Richard's and a woman's. She got up to see who it was, but Richard had left the house and appeared to be standing on the steps outside. It was dark and she couldn't see who he was talking to, but the tone of the conversation seemed slightly agitated. Who is that? She asked when Richard returned. Jenny, my assistant at school. She was just dropping off some homework I left behind. I was a bit annoyed because it's quite late and she didn't really need to. Where is it? Asked Gwen innocently, noticing there was nothing in Richard's hands. In my briefcase in the hall, replied Richard promptly. I'll go in early and do it in the morning. I don't think I've ever met Jenny, said Gwen. But you've never let me meet any of the staff at your school. They can't all be that boring. You're right, said Richard. I like to keep our private life completely separate from school. It's bad enough being recognised by kids in the street, let alone having to socialise with other teachers. The following day, Richard was in school at 7:30. There was no one else in the staff room. He went to the kitchen area in the corner and made himself a coffee. Not long later, other teachers drifted in. Jenny was among the early arrivals. Seeing her, Richard got up and ushered her out of the corridor out of earshot. Are you crazy? He said, the words hissing out almost under his breath. What were you thinking of, coming over like that? Calm down, said Jenny lightly. She was a woman in her early 40s with short blonde hair, cut to just cover her ears. She lived on the other side of the city from Richard, in a small terraced house with her son, William. She had been at the school for around 7 or 8 years and, like Richard, enjoyed watching her young pupils progress through the grades. You've never invited me to your house. I just wanted to see inside and meet your wife. I was rather hoping she would answer the door. Well, she didn't, and you won't, said Richard sharply. Anyway, I thought we'd agreed to keep things the way they are, low-key. Well, you might want to keep it that way. I think it's time for us all to be friends. Richard said nothing and returned to the staff room, looking grim-faced. This was a very unexpected and unwelcome turn of events. But it was a Thursday morning, and after another long week, most of his colleagues were wearing grim expressions. The early October weekend promised to two extremes, unseasonably warm followed by a cold snap. You could be on the beach one day and in winter woolies the next. Richard left for his music festival on the Saturday morning, and Gwen busied herself with the laundry and shopping for the following week's meals. On Saturday night, she went to Sue's. Sue insisted that she should stay over and enjoy a Sunday walk. They spent a warm and sunny afternoon on one of the many coastal paths in the area. After a pleasant interlude in a local tea shop, it was time to go home. Sue tried to insist on giving her a lift, but Gwen was adamant she would catch a bus. It was only about half an hour to her house, and the bus went right past the door. There were few people on board, and Gwen sat on her own on the near side so she could see all the houses, shops, and people passing by. It was quite by chance that passing one street the bus slowed down, and Gwen looked down a long narrow road with cars parked on both sides in front of small terraced homes. About 5 down she glimpsed a family getting out of a car and walking towards a house. There was a man, a woman, and a small child. Gwen caught only a glimpse, but the man looked very like Richard, except that he was wearing shorts and carrying a child's bucket and spade. It couldn't be Richard. Richard always wore a suit, even on a warm sunny Sunday like this. Still, the thought stayed with her and puzzled her all the way home. It was about 6 p.m. and Richard had told her he wouldn't be back until about 7. She got changed and settled down in the living room. Taking Canzonetta from its sleeve, she put it on the record player and lowered the needle. It was just as Richard played it, a melodic opening, followed by that sudden dynamic contrast she liked so much. Later, she heard the click of the latch and Richard call out, "It's me. Have you had a good weekend?" He was wearing his suit, but his face was quite red. "Gosh, you look as though you've been out in the sun," said Gwen, looking up from the sofa. "Oh yes, that," said Richard, putting his hand to his face. "It was such a sunny day. I shouldn't have let the children persuade me to conduct outdoors. I was out there for over an hour. I can really feel it now." "Well, tomorrow is going to be completely different," said Gwen rather glumly. "They're forecasting a huge drop in the temperature. It's going to be so cold, and I have to go to Swaddling." "Wear the fox hat," said Richard with a mischievous smile. "What are you talking about? I don't have a fox hat," said Gwen, looking at him quizzically. "It was only a joke," replied Richard. "I just thought of it when you mentioned the cold weather. There's a story going round the staff room that someone picked up from the Daily Telegraph. It was about Harold Wilson and his secretary. Apparently he was sitting in the House of Commons when she passed him a note. It said they had to travel to some obscure place called Octomukti the next day. Wilson passed her a note back saying, 'Wear the fox hat.'" Gwen looked at him, then the penny dropped. She wasn't used to Richard telling risque jokes, but she smiled, somewhat disapprovingly. The next day, Monday, Gwen had planned to go on one of her collection routes near their home, but she decided to change her plan and retrace the bus route she had taken home the previous day. There was something still nagging her. She thought she could remember the street where she had seen that family. It was by a set of traffic lights about 2 miles away. She couldn't be sure which house, but armed with her red and white collection tin and Salvation Army tabard, she boarded the bus and set off. She got off at the stop near the lights she remembered and started from the first house on the right-hand side where she'd seen them. Once again, people were very friendly, inviting her in for cups of tea and a biscuit. But Gwen was anxious to get on, thanking them for the kindness and moving to the next house. At the 5th one, she rang the bell and waited. It was answered by a woman who looked to be in her 40s, quite smartly dressed with blonde hair cut very short around her ears. Explaining her mission, Gwen was pleased to receive another friendly welcome. "Please wait," said the woman. "I'll get my purse." As she waited, Gwen could hear the sound of a piano. The tune sounded familiar. It was Canzonetta, but not as she'd heard Richard play it. This sounded like it was being played with one finger, like a child might play it. The woman returned and put a shilling in Gwen's tin. "Who's that playing the piano?" asked Gwen, intrigued. "Oh, that's my son William," said the woman. "Do come in and see him. He's just learning to play." Gwen walked into a small room off the hallway, where a young boy was seated at a piano. "Say hello to this nice lady," said the woman. "Hello," replied the boy. "That's a lovely tune you're playing," said Gwen, smiling. "Yes," said the boy. "My daddy is teaching me." Part 2. It had been another tiring Monday for Richard. Lessons, meetings, dealing with parents and their annoying complaints. The most irritating were those asking why he hadn't replied to letters that had been sent only the previous day. That and the parents who were always on his case asking why their snivelling children weren't making better progress. Richard was looking forward to going home. Gwen always had a glass of wine and a nice dinner ready. This evening it would be especially welcome. He parked his car and walked up the steps to the front door. Turning the key in the latch and pushing it open, he saw the house was in darkness. None of the lights were on, but somewhere he could hear the scratchy sounds of Canzonetta. He called out his usual greeting, "Hi, it's me, I'm home." But there was no reply. Finding the switch, Richard turned on the light. Confronting his eyes was a scene of complete devastation. The house looked like it had been ransacked. Richard's heart began to race. What had happened? Where was Gwen? He raced up the stairs, nearly tripping on the shoes that lay scattered on every step. "Gwen, are you there?" he called. No answer. Switching on the bedroom lights, he saw yet more chaos. His suits and shirts flung all over the floor, drawers and wardrobes emptied. It was just how he imagined the burglary would look. The burglar, or burglars, want a quick entry and exit, so they hurriedly ransack every shelf and every cupboard in the hope of finding a hidden bundle of banknotes. Richard and Gwen never left money lying about the house, so at least they were spared that indignity. His heart still racing, Richard returned down the stairs. As he did so, he became aware of a strange smell. It definitely smelled like something was burning, but with a rather sickly sweetness. This time he headed into the living room. Before he could even switch on the light, he could see in the half-darkness another scene of devastation, only this time more chilling. His precious broadwood piano was covered in what looked like blood. It was a deep crimson, slowly dripping from the keys. The piano itself looked like it had been struck 1,000 blows from a heavy object. Then, on the floor, he saw the shattered remains of a harp. What madman could have inflicted this mayhem? And where was poor Gwen? Lying dead on the floor of another room, he feared. Perhaps she had managed to crawl away from her attacker, only to be mercilessly hunted down and bludgeoned to death. This was becoming surreal. He was in a nightmare from which there seemed no escape. Switching on the light to take in the full horror of the scene, Richard noticed that the gory, congealed crimson mess covering the broadwood looked slightly different. It was darker than blood and a little lumpy. He approached it and took a closer look. He placed a finger on it. It felt sticky. Gingerly he put it to his mouth. It tasted like strawberry jam. Then he looked on the floor again and saw the source of the burning smell. It was the still smouldering remains of the Canzonetta. And where was that scratchy music coming from? In the corner of the room, Richard saw the one item that hadn't been wrecked, their record player. On it, with a needle stuck in the groove of a record covered in deep scratches, was Canzonetta. Suddenly, a cold realization came over him. There was no point in looking any further. Gwen had gone, and so had the harp case.